The person taking up the most space in your mind right now probably doesn't think about you at all. And somehow, that makes it worse. You could name them right now without even trying. Their face arrives uninvited, usually at 3 in the morning, usually when you thought you were finally past it. And the strangest part is they didn't do anything catastrophic. No betrayal, no dramatic ending, sometimes no ending at all. They simply never fully arrived. And somehow, that incomplete presence carved a deeper wound than any clean break ever could. Psychologists have a name for this, but the clinical language misses what it actually feels like. It feels like haunting. Not like a ghost in a horror film, like a frequency you can't stop picking up no matter how far you move the dial. You've probably told yourself it's ridiculous by now, that you should be over it, that this much mental real estate is embarrassing to give someone who gave you so little. But here is what nobody tells you about unrequited attachment. The cruelty isn't that they rejected you, it's that they never fully did. A clean no is something the brain can process. It hurts, but it has edges. You know where the wound begins and ends. But a maybe, a someday, a door left 1 inch open, that is the wound that never closes. And you have spent months, maybe years, living in that inch of open space. The people who choose you completely don't haunt you like this. There is nothing to solve, nothing to decode, no hidden message waiting to be understood. But the ones who stayed ambiguous, they leave you searching for patterns in static. You replay conversations looking for the moment it went wrong, as if finding it would finally set you free. But the moment never reveals itself because there was no single moment, just a slow fade you weren't allowed to witness. And that is the paradox nobody warns you about. Absence creates more presence than presence ever could. When someone is fully there, you don't need to think about them constantly. They simply exist in your life like furniture. But when someone is half there, your mind works overtime trying to complete the picture. You build them in the spaces where they refused to show up. And you begin to love your construction more than you ever loved the original. This isn't weakness. It's what human brains are designed to do with incomplete information. But understanding why your brain does this won't prepare you for how. Because the mechanism that keeps you hooked is the same one casinos have exploited for decades. In 1971, a psychologist named Michael Zeiler conducted an experiment that would accidentally explain why you can't stop thinking about someone who barely thinks about you. He put pigeons in boxes with levers that dispensed food. But here's what made it strange. Some pigeons got food every single time they pressed the lever. Others got food randomly, sometimes on the first press, sometimes the 20th, sometimes not at all. The pigeons with guaranteed rewards pressed their levers, got their food, and moved on with their lives. The pigeons with unpredictable rewards became obsessed. They pressed and pressed and pressed, even when the food stopped coming entirely. This is intermittent reinforcement, and your brain responds to it exactly the same way. When someone is consistently warm, your dopamine system registers it, rewards you, and then calms down. It's pleasant, but your brain files it under predictable and moves its attention elsewhere. But when someone runs hot and cold, your dopamine system never gets the chance to settle. Each unexpected moment of warmth triggers a spike, not because they're special, but because you couldn't predict it. Your brain doesn't distinguish between this person genuinely cares and this pattern is interesting. It just knows that unpredictable rewards demand constant vigilance. And vigilance feels exactly like obsession because they use the same circuits. This is why the person who texts back within minutes becomes background noise, while the one who disappears for days becomes your entire focus. It's not that you don't appreciate reliability, it's that your reward system literally cannot stay activated by it. Casinos figured this out decades ago. Slot machines are programmed to deliver wins on a variable ratio schedule, just often enough to keep you pulling, just unpredictable enough to keep you hoping. The person you can't stop thinking about operates on the same principle, except they probably don't even know they're doing it. A text after 3 days of silence hits your brain like a jackpot, not because of what it says, but because of when it arrived. Your brain releases more dopamine for unexpected rewards than for expected ones. This is neurologically proven. The inconsistency isn't a flaw in your connection. It's the entire engine driving your attachment. And here's where it gets darker. Intermittent reinforcement doesn't just create attachment. It creates the strongest attachment known to behavioral psychology. Bonds formed through inconsistency are harder to break than bonds formed through constant affection. This is why people leave stable relationships to chase someone who keeps them guessing. It's not that they're ungrateful, it's that their brain is responding to neurological programming that predates civilization. In survival terms, unpredictable food sources required more attention than reliable ones. The berry bush that sometimes had fruit was more important to track than the one that always did. Your ancestors who ignored variable reward sources died. The ones who became obsessed with them survived. You inherited their brain. So when someone is warm one day and distant the next, your ancient survival instincts treat them like a resource that requires monitoring. You can't will yourself out of this any more than you can will yourself to stop feeling hungry. The system operates beneath conscious control, which is exactly why it feels so maddening. You know, logically, that this person isn't worth the space they occupy in your mind. But logic has no authority over a dopamine system that's running its own calculations. And here's what makes the trap complete. The less they give you, the more you start inventing. Because your brain needs to fill the gaps, and what it fills them with is far more dangerous than any variable reward schedule. It starts the moment they stop texting back. In that silence, your brain begins to write. Not words, something more dangerous. Meaning. You decide their 3-word reply was actually profound. They're just guarded, complicated, worth decoding. You transform their inconsistency into mystery, their distance into depth. And this is where the haunting truly begins, because you're no longer attached to a person. You're attached to a ghost you built from the scraps they left behind. Psychologists call this phenomenon a parasocial construction. But that clinical term hides something darker. You've essentially fallen in love with your own imagination wearing their face. Every quality you admire, you supplied it. Every moment of connection you replay, you authored half of it and edited the rest. The human brain despises incomplete patterns. It will finish any story you start, whether the ending is real or not. So when they gave you 30%, your mind built the other 70%. And what you built was perfect, because fantasy has no contradictions, no flaws, no morning breath. The person who was fully present never stood a chance against the one who remained perpetually unfinished. Because completion kills desire, and you can never complete what was never really there. But here's the cruelest part of falling for a ghost. The ghost can never disappoint you, so you can never be truly free of them. Every flaw you eventually noticed, you explained away. Every red flag, you recolored. They weren't avoidant. They were healing from something you'd understand if they let you close enough. They weren't using you. They were afraid of how much they felt. The story you told yourself became the prison you couldn't escape, and the most dangerous stories are the ones about potential. You didn't fall in love with who they were. You fell in love with who they might become if everything aligned. If they healed their wounds, if timing improved, if they finally saw what you saw. You were in love with a future that required them to become someone they never showed any evidence of being. And that future never had to prove itself. It just had to stay possible. Possibility is the most addictive drug the mind can manufacture, and they gave you just enough to keep that possibility alive without ever having to deliver on it. So you kept watering a garden where nothing was planted. You kept showing up to a theater where they never took the stage, and the audience, just you in the dark, applauding a performance that existed only in your script. The ghost you love is made of your own longing projected onto a convenient screen. And killing a ghost is nearly impossible, because the ghost is you. The parts of yourself you poured into them, the hopes you hung on their silhouette, the version of your life that only existed in a future with them in it. You're haunted by your own capacity for devotion, trapped in a house you built from borrowed materials. And while you've been constructing this elaborate cathedral to someone who barely knocked on your door, something has been happening in your brain that makes escape feel chemically impossible. Here is the clinical reality of what you are experiencing. Your brain has been hijacked. Not metaphorically, literally, measurably, in ways that would show up on a brain scan. When researchers put people experiencing unrequited love into an MRI machine, they found something that changed how we understand heartbreak. The same regions that light up during cocaine withdrawal were blazing. This is not poetry. This is pharmacology. Your ventral tegmental area, the brain's reward factory, has learned to associate this person with survival-level importance. Every time you think of them, dopamine floods your system. Not because you are happy, but because your brain is screaming that something essential is missing. The same chemical that makes food taste better when you are starving is now making their memory feel like oxygen. But here is where it turns cruel. Dopamine is not actually the pleasure chemical everyone thinks it is. Dopamine is the wanting chemical, the craving chemical, the chemical of pursuit. It keeps you chasing, not arriving, which means your brain is chemically designed to want what it cannot have. And the moment something becomes unavailable, your dopamine system treats it like the most important thing in the world. This is why rejection does not kill attraction. It supercharges it. Studies show that romantic rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, specifically the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. The same neural architecture that processes a broken bone is processing your broken attachment. This is not weakness. This is your brain treating social abandonment as a threat to survival, because for most of human history, it was. To be rejected by the tribe meant death, and your amygdala has not updated its software since the savannah. So when you cannot stop thinking about them, when the pain feels disproportionate to what actually happened, your ancient brain is responding to perceived extinction-level danger. And while your prefrontal cortex knows this person is not essential to your survival, it does not have veto power over the alarm systems. Here is the part that should disturb you. Your stress response has been running continuously. Cortisol, the hormone your body releases during threat, has been flooding your system every time you replay the rejection. Your body has been in low-grade fight or flight for weeks, maybe months. Heart rate elevated, immune system suppressed, sleep architecture destroyed. You are not sad. You are under siege. Researchers call this state frustration attraction. the paradox where blocked goal pursuit intensifies rather than diminishes desire. The more the goal recedes, the more resources your brain allocates to pursuing it. Your obsessive thoughts are not a malfunction. They are your brain's desperate attempt to solve what it perceives as a survival problem. And there is one more chemical player that makes this whole situation feel like drowning. Norepinephrine, the chemical of focused attention, has narrowed your entire world to this single person. Everything else, work, friends, hobbies, your own future, has been pushed to the periphery of your attention. You have been neurologically tunnel-visioned onto someone who is not even in the room. This is why willpower feels useless. You are not fighting a bad habit. You are fighting the combined force of your reward, stress, and attention systems all conspiring against your peace. The cruel irony is that your brain responds to this attachment the same way it would respond to an actual relationship, maybe even more intensely. Because the uncertainty itself is the accelerant, your brain is working harder to secure what might be lost than to maintain what is already possessed. You are neurologically bonded to someone who never fully arrived, and that is precisely why the bond feels unbreakable. People will tell you to just stop thinking about them, as if you could tell your hypothalamus to take a day off. They will tell you to move on, as if your limbic system takes requests. What they do not understand is that you are not choosing this. You are being chemically held hostage by systems designed to keep you attached at any cost. And because your rational mind cannot override this chemistry, you start to believe that maybe the answer is just one more conversation, one more explanation, one final moment of contact that will finally let your brain release its grip and set you free. This is the lie you tell yourself at 3 a.m, that understanding will set you free. If you could just hear them explain why, if they could just give you one honest answer, the spell would finally break. The word for this fantasy is closure, and it may be the cruelest myth modern psychology ever invented. Closure suggests that attachment is a door that can be locked with the right combination of words. But your limbic system does not speak English. It speaks dopamine, cortisol, and the language of survival. You cannot reason with the part of your brain that still believes this person is necessary for your existence. And yet you convince yourself that one more conversation will change everything. So you reach out. A text, a call, a carefully worded message you've rewritten 40 times. And maybe they respond. Maybe they even agree to talk. And for a moment, it feels like progress. What happens next is something researchers have documented over and over again, and it is the opposite of what you expect. Contact does not weaken the bond. It reactivates every dormant circuit that was beginning to heal. Your brain does not distinguish between seeing them to get closure and seeing them because there is hope. To your limbic system, contact is contact, and contact means the attachment object still exists in your world. The conversation you hoped would end your suffering becomes another deposit in the addiction account. But perhaps the words themselves are the problem. Surely, if they said the right thing, you could finally let go. This is where the fantasy becomes almost architectural in its complexity. You imagine there is a specific combination of words that will make the pain make sense. If they could just explain their reasons clearly enough, the part of you that is still waiting would finally understand and stop. But here is the truth that will sting. Their reasons do not matter. They could give you the most eloquent, compassionate, thorough explanation ever spoken, and your attachment would remain exactly as strong. Because your attachment was never based on reasons. It was based on neurochemistry, on pattern recognition, on survival instincts misfiring in a modern world. You cannot logic your way out of a prison that logic did not build. And there is something even more insidious happening when you seek closure. The act of seeking closure is itself a form of maintaining connection. As long as there is something unresolved, as long as you need one more thing from them, the relationship continues. The need for closure becomes the last thread you refuse to cut, because cutting it would mean admitting that it is actually over. And that admission is the thing you have been running from all along. What you call seeking closure is often just hope wearing a different mask. It is the final negotiation with reality, the last bargain that lets you believe contact might still change something. You do not actually want answers. You want the conversation to secretly lead somewhere else. Somewhere impossible. Somewhere where they suddenly realize what they are losing. The hardest part of letting go is not the pain of their absence. It is the death of that secret hope. Because as long as you are seeking closure, you are still in the story. The moment you stop needing anything from them is the moment you have to face what remains. And what remains is not a door that needs closing. It is a loss that needs grieving. Here is the part no one prepares you for. The person you need to grieve never actually existed. You have been mourning a ghost you built from glimpses, a story you told yourself in the spaces where they stayed silent. The real person, the one who could not or would not choose you, that person you barely knew at all. What you knew was the version your longing invented to justify its own existence. And that is the cruelest trick of unrequited attachment. It asks you to grieve someone who was never really there. But here is the part that makes it even harder. The future you imagined was more vivid than most people's present. You had already planned the mornings, the conversations, the way they would look at you across crowded rooms. You had rehearsed anniversaries that never happened, fights you would have resolved beautifully, a whole life that existed only in the theater of your mind. That future felt so real that losing it registers as losing something you actually had. Your brain cannot distinguish between mourning what was and mourning what you believed would be. To the neural architecture processing this loss, the distinction is meaningless. A future unlived is still a future lost. And that is why people who have never experienced unrequited attachment cannot understand its weight. They see you mourning nothing, someone who never committed, a relationship that never began, and they wonder why you cannot simply move on. What they do not understand is that you are not mourning one thing. You are mourning three. First, you mourn the person, or rather, the fiction of them you constructed so carefully from fragments. Every silence became depth. Every crumb of attention became proof. Every ambiguity became potential waiting to unfold. You did not fall in love with a person. You fell in love with a possibility you painted onto their outline. Second, you mourned the future. The life that existed fully formed in your imagination, but nowhere else. The holiday you would have taken, the home you would have made, the person you would have become beside them. That parallel life was so detailed, so inhabited in your mind, that abandoning it feels like burning down a house you lived in. Third, and this is the one that cuts deepest, you mourn the version of yourself that only existed when you were wanting them. There was a you who came alive in the anticipation, who felt electric with hope, who believed they deserved something extraordinary. That version of you was not sustainable, was built on fantasy, but they felt more alive than you feel now. And letting go of this attachment means letting go of that self too, the one who still believed the story could end differently. This is why letting go feels like a death, even when nothing tangible ended. Because something did end. Hope did. And hope is not nothing. Hope was the engine that ran your days, the thing you thought about before sleep, the secret warmth you carried through cold rooms. Without it, you are left with something terrifying, a present moment with no promise attached. The grief is not just about them. It is about having to rebuild meaning from the ground up. For so long, they were the answer to questions you had not fully asked yourself. Now, you have to sit with those questions unanswered, unmedicated by fantasy, and that is perhaps the hardest part of all. The grief will not arrive in a straight line. It will circle back when you least expect it. A song, a street, a certain quality of light will ambush you months after you thought you were done. This does not mean you have failed. It means you loved something, even if that something was partly your own invention. And love, even misdirected, even unreturned, leaves a mark that takes time to fade. The question is not how to stop the grief, but what to do with the space it eventually leaves behind. Because something will fill it. And what that something becomes depends on what you understand about why you needed this in the first place. The slowest part of letting go is realizing there is no sudden moment when it happens. You do not wake up healed. You wake up one morning and notice the wound bothered you slightly less than the morning before. Release does not arrive through force. It arrives through understanding. The first thing you have to understand is this: the attachment was never really about them. It was about what they represented, the need they seemed capable of filling, the wound they seemed shaped to heal. What were you actually hungry for when you looked at them? Validation you never got as a child, proof that you were worth choosing, escape from a self you did not want to be alone with? The person was the vessel, but the longing existed before they did. And this is where most people get stuck. They try to starve the longing instead of redirecting it. You cannot kill a need. You can only find a healthier way to meet it. If what you craved was validation, you have to learn to give it to yourself, not as affirmation in a mirror, but as action that proves your own worth to you. If what you craved was escape, you have to build a self worth staying inside. If what you craved was the thrill of pursuit, you have to find something else worth chasing, something that actually wants to be caught. But here's the part nobody prepares you for. Before new things can grow in that space, you have to learn to tolerate the emptiness. The obsession filled something, and when you remove it, there is a hollow where it used to live. Most people panic in that hollow and reach for something, anything, to fill it again. A new person, a new obsession, a distraction shaped just like the last one. And the cycle begins again. Different face, same wound. The alternative is harder. You sit with the emptiness until it stops feeling like an emergency. You learn that loneliness will not kill you. It just feels like it will. You discover that the self you were so afraid to be alone with is not as terrible as you imagined. And slowly, without you noticing the exact moment, the hollow starts to feel less like absence and more like space. Space for something that actually wants to be there. Space for a version of you that does not need someone else's inconsistency to feel alive. The truth is, you will still think of them sometimes, maybe for years, maybe forever. But there is a difference between a memory that visits and a ghost that haunts. Release is not forgetting. It is remembering without the ache demanding something from you. It is not the absence of the scar. It is the scar no longer being tender to the touch. And one day, not today, not soon, but eventually, you will realize you have been free for a while now, and you did not even notice when it happened. Freedom, it turns out, arrives not as a door opening, but as the slow realization that you stopped checking whether it was locked.